Alright guys, so this is Miss Brito, and this is the first recorded lecture for this distance learning experiment. Hopefully it's not too painful for you guys. So this is correlating with AMSCO chapter 26. Hopefully you have your textbook, so if you don't like the sound of my voice, you can just read that instead. And we're looking at Truman and the Cold War. I'm going to break this into two videos. So this is part one, and we're looking more domestically here. So first thing to know is World War II is over and our economy is doing really well. We have the strongest economy in the world at this time, and we have a lot of pent-up consumer demand. So remember, guys, before World War II, we have the Great Depression, so no one can afford anything. And then during World War II, when the Great Depression ends because everyone gets jobs again, during that mass mobilization, no one can buy stuff because we have shortages for the war and we have rationing. So now everybody wants to go spend, spend, spend. And we have the highest standard of living of any country ever. A lot of this is because, remember, the war is not really fought on American soil with the exception of Pearl Harbor. So while other countries have their factories and their cities demolished, ours are going strong. Now, the big concern with the war ending is what to do with the GIs that are coming back from the war, because we don't want them to be unemployed and then go back into sort of our mindset during the Great Depression. So what Congress does is Congress passes the GI Bill, which is officially known as the Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944. And this helps veterans transition from this military lifestyle to a civilian lifestyle. They get money for college, they get low interest loans to buy homes, farms, or sort of business. And this is really going to stimulate the economy because, for one thing, there's actually not enough colleges for them. So they're actually going to be expanding colleges, building more community colleges, hiring people to run those. We also have new homes being built because now we have a large group of people who can afford to buy a house, and there's not enough for them. So we're going to see a lot of construction booms. And we also are going to now have, with these people going to college, a much more educated workforce than we did before. Now, a caveat with this GI Bill is that it's mostly going to help white veterans. It will not help minority veterans as much. And of course, we're going to get the baby boom. So if you've had Miss Jimerson before, you know that she talks about being a baby boomer. So anybody who was born between 1945 and 1960 is officially a baby boomer. That is their generation. You might know them from the OK Boomer meme. So they're a result of, for one thing, everyone's coming back from war and they're getting married. So we have a lot of younger marriages. We have people who didn't get married during the Great Depression because they didn't have money, or they didn't have kids during the Great Depression because they didn't have money. And now everyone's happy and stable and economy's going great. So we get lots and lots and lots and lots of babies. So initially, women are focused more on childbearing during this time. But by 1960, it's important to note that a third of women actually worked outside of the home. All right, so women who are married, they are actually going to work as well. And where do you put all these babies? Well, you put them in big houses out in the suburbs. So people need space now. They have these giant families. And with the GI Bill, people can get these low interest loans. So we have this construction boom in the suburbs. The most famous kind of original suburb is Levittown. This is the first suburb where they did these mass produced homes. This is where you get the idea of the suburbs where they have like 4 or 5 houses that they just built over and over and over and over again. And these guys are going to be segregated areas. So for Levittown, for an example, you could not move in there if you were not white. They would not sell houses to non-whites, and they even put into their deeds, their house deeds, that you could not sell to a non-white family. So as a result, the cities are going to be increasingly poor and segregated, and then the white middle class is going to be moving out to the suburbs. And you can see here is a sign of people who are just letting it known publicly that they want these to be white neighborhood only. All right, and then over here we have the Sun Belt. So another thing that we see during post-war America is people can move again. People can afford to move of their own will, not because they're just looking for a job. And so we see people start moving to the Sun Belt. So this part of the South, which, hasn't really seen a lot of action positively wise, or positive wise since World War II, they start to get people moving there, and there starts to be new economic opportunities in the South. The South starts to get some industry. Much of this is done by, of course, the defense industry that during World War II started setting up military bases and military factories down here because the land was cheaper, taxes were cheaper, wages were cheaper. So we call this area the Sun Belt because guess what? It's really sunny and it's really hot. All right, so our president of the era, Truman, Harry Truman right here. So he was actually vice president for only one of FDR's term, his last term, and he was actually chosen to replace FDR's first vice president, Henry Wallace, who was kind of seen as too radical. Remember, at the end of FDR's second to third term, he's losing some support. He can't pass whatever he wants anymore. People are worried he's going too far. So he's trying to choose a more moderate person to help balance the ticket. And then again, remember, FDR, he dies 3 months into his fourth term. So Truman is all of a sudden now president. He's very modest, he's very decisive, and he's very unpretentious. He speaks like a regular person. He's kind of known as being very blunt. And he attempts to follow FDR's New Deal footsteps. But he's going to have a lot of issues with the conservatives in Congress, both the conservative Democrats, mostly in the South, as well as the Republican business owners. And so he has issues with plans for his full employment. He kind of wanted to keep it like the New Deal, where you had the government hiring lots of people to do work. And he's going to run into a lot of opposition to his plan to give civil rights for African Americans. So let's start with economics first. He wants a national health insurance, which if you've been paying attention to the news, people are still fighting over today. He also wanted an increase in the minimum wage, something else people are fighting over today. And he wanted a bill to commit the U.S. to maintaining full employment. So again, putting people to work for the government by doing things like the WPA, the CCC, etc. Congress does not pass any of these things. Instead, they create the Employment Act of 1946, which creates this council of economic advisors to sort of give help, give advice to the president and Congress on how to better the economy. Truman also wanted to maintain price controls to prevent inflation, but he is denied this opportunity by Southern Democrats and Republicans, the conservatives coming together across party lines, and they remove them. This does result, though, in a 25% inflation rate, so Truman's probably sitting there thinking, told you so. All right. And of course, people get angry when there's inflation, so we had lots of strikes as well. We had 4.5 million going on strikes. And this includes railroad workers and miners, which again, when those kind of shut down, it shuts down the whole economy because you can't move goods and you can't produce energy. So Truman responded by seizing the mines and having the military operate them, which now makes union members angry at him as well. Now, Truman's big thing was civil rights. He's the first modern president to use the power of the presidency to challenge racial discrimination. He establishes the Committee on Civil Rights. He also strengthens the civil rights decisions of the Justice Department, which is going to be really important when we get into the 1950s with Brown v. Board of Education. We also see the really, really big thing, definitely star this, write this down. In 1948, he passes an executive order which ends racial segregation in the federal government, including the military. So this is an executive order. So he does not have to go through Congress because, again, the military is under his domain. He is commander-in-chief. So he can make rules about it that Congress has nothing to say. They have no input. And so he does this. And remember, during World War II, the military bases are getting built up in the South because the land is cheap. So do we think the South is going to be very happy with racial integration happening? No. Yeah, good job. All right. So another thing he does is he asks Congress to create the Fair Employment Practices Commission to prevent hiring discrimination for African Americans. This does have to go through Congress, and so it is blocked by Southern Democrats. So basically, we have a lot of different groups upset with Truman. And when the next election comes for the midterms, Republicans are going to win majorities in both houses of Congress. So now we have Republicans dominating Congress, a Democrat in the White House, and high tensions. The 80th Congress tried to pass tax cuts for the wealthy, but Truman vetoed it. They do pass the 22nd Amendment. This officially makes it a two-term limit for presidents, so no more FDR-type candidates. We're going to follow Washington's precedent from now on. FDR is the one anomaly in that whole thing about having more than two terms. And the big thing the 80th Congress does is they pass the Taft-Hartley veto. This is passed over Taft-Hartley Act, and this is passed over Truman's veto. This is going to weaken unions, all right? It's going to be outlawing the closed shop, meaning you have to join a union before you can get hired as like a carpenter or as a teacher, or something like that, and it's going to replace it with the right to work laws. Which means that you don't have to be in a union to join it. It also really strongly weakens unions. It also allows it makes it illegal for unions to sort of support other unions in a boycott. So if I'm working in the railroad industry and say the miners go on strike, I can't boycott the mining company just to show my solidarity with another union member. And importantly, the president has the right to call an 80-day cooling period before a strike, which endangers national safety. So that could be, again, something like the railroad, something like the mines. The president can basically prevent a strike for 80 days. So Taft-Hartley Act weakens unions. It's kind of the opposite of the Wagner Act, which was passed during the New Deal. So now we have the next election in 1948. Truman's popularity is at an all-time low, and he's basically seeing the splintering of the Democratic Party, kind of like how we saw with Teddy Roosevelt and Taft splitting up that Republican Party. All right, so kind of think along those lines. We have these third parties forming. The first third party that forms is known as the Dixiecrats. So think Dixie means, generally the South. It's a nickname for the South. So Democrats, Dixiecrats. These are Southern Democrats. Their official party name they're going to give themselves is the States' Right Party. They're going to form under South Carolina's Governor J. Storm Thurmond in response to Truman's civil rights policies. The new Progressive Party is going to be run by FDR's first vice president, Wallace, who was seen as too progressive, too radical. And so we have kind of this liberal group leaving the Democratic Party as well as a more conservative group. And so Truman's looking very weak. All right. And the Republicans expected a win then. They nominated New York's Governor Dewey. He ran a cautious campaign. Let me just not step on anyone's toes, and I should be able to win. But guess what? Truman shocks the world. So you can see here, papers had already printed the headlines in advance announcing Truman's defeat, but he shockingly wins. He campaigned very, very hard in 1948. He gave speeches around the country against the do-nothing 80th Congress, and he's able to reunite FDR's New Deal coalition, but he does lose the Dixiecrats. So we see like the storming of the Dixiecrats out of the Democratic Party. They're not officially going to be in the Republican Party yet. This is when we start to see that kind of slow transition of political parties into what we know is more modern day. So basically, the Dixiecrats are going to kind of be like on their own for a bit as a little third party down in the South. And then now that Truman is elected again, or really elected for the first time, he's going to once again ask Congress to pass more reform. And he gives now his programs a nice fancy name. So FDR had the New Deal, Truman has the Fair Deal. And again, Truman calls for national health care, federal aid to education, increased minimum wage, civil rights legislation, funds for public housing, and a new farm program. Pretty much everything is blocked because we're gonna have conflicts with Congress again, and as you guys know, when there is foreign issues, domestic issues kind of get pushed aside. So we're gonna have concerns now with the Cold War. The only thing that really does get passed is an expansion of the minimum wage. It goes from 40 to 70 cents, and some new groups are added into Social Security. Okay, so we'll do part 2, the Cold War beginning, next video, because I need a glass of water because I've been talking a lot. All right, hope this wasn't too painful. Bye.